Welcome back to Spider Red. I'm on my last part for how I would change college football. This is part 4. This is about the college football playoff, how I would make a few changes, and how I would change scheduling based off what I've done in the past with changing the conferences from the power of 5 to the power of 3. Also changing the group of 5 to the mid-majors of 3. I like calling them mid-majors over just a group. So let's start talking about the college football playoff. First, I'll give a quick recap of my other 3 parts. Of course, I've done super conferences. You can go back and watch that video, especially just me getting rid of the ACC and the Pac-2. And I just have 3 conferences. I renamed the Big 12 to the Big 24, gave them 24 teams. I renamed the Big 10 to the Big 25, gave them 25 teams. That's mostly because they took on Notre Dame and parts of the ACC. And then I would just have the SEC. And they took on a good portion of the ACC and grabbed a few of the Big 12 teams. And then Big 12 kind of focused mostly on the old Pac-12. Then I moved to NIL. And NIL, I said basically that I had already created a new NCAA, but it was managed and ran by the conferences. So I call it the CCA, the Coalition of Conference Athletics, because I think the conferences do a better job than an NCAA. I also built a salary cap for the NIL so that the schools could control it instead of having boosters and not having too much to say. If they just go ahead and have that money come in and let them control it through a salary cap, so to speak, I think that would help them out. Then my last video was part 3 with the recruiting and the transfer portal. It's more about changing recruiting to the way it was, going back to a true National Signing Day in February, and then having the transfer portal go afterwards, and then limiting how many times a student can transfer or how many transfers a school can intake. It's more about intake than doesn't matter how many leaves, it's more about the intake. So that's what recruiting and transfer portal was. So let's go ahead and get to the college football playoff and scheduling. Right now, this slide I'm going to show you the current college football playoff. I've been doing my top 25, and I show you the 12-game tournament that would be the playoff. We all know that the CFP is increased to 12 teams for this year, 2024. They approved recently, last month or so, the 5+7 format, which means the champion of the ACC, the Big 10, Big 12, SEC automatically gets a bid, and then the highest ranked group of 5. That group of 5 doesn't have to be in the top 12. It just has to be the top ranked in the top 25 to get one of those bids. And then there's 7 at-large bids. Round 1 will all be home games for the highest ranked seed. And this is the part I don't like. Why no bowl games for round 1? You could take some of these lower bowl games that hardly get any viewership and give them a playoff game. Help the city that they're in. I'll talk about this more later. But especially for the students that lose this game, you're a top 12 program, but you go to another school, get beat in the playoff, and you don't get to experience like the bowls. I think that's just a bad idea. So I'm going to talk about changing that and making a few other changes. So that is the current CFP. And I'll further discuss what I'm going to change on the CFP. I would have really chose 8 teams instead of 12, but we're already at 12. And then they recently also proposed this 14-team playoff, like a 3-3-2-2-1 plus 3 at large. And then if Notre Dame's in the top, they automatically get a bid. That's why the Notre Dame's in the ACC for all other sports except for football. And I know it's a lot to do with that NBC TV contract, but Notre Dame really needs to go into my Big 25. And I apologize. It just annoys me how they cater to Notre Dame all the time. Anyway, to look at my CFP changes, we need to revamp the regular season. The scheduling has to be changed, and that's what I'm going to cover first. So let's transition into the scheduling. Let's take a look into how I would build the regular season. I would have a 12-game regular season within a 14-week time span and 2 byes. So when I did the super conferences, they play 10 conference games, and then they have to play one mid-major team and then one other Power 3 team that's not in their conference. And I'll show all this when I do the Michigan schedule at the bottom. But to start the season, to allow for 2 byes for each team, I would start the third week of August every year. So this year it would be August 24th, and the regular season would run all the way until Thanksgiving weekend, and that would be November the 23rd. I think it would be awesome to have all the rival games that Thanksgiving holiday. You could have Black Friday rivals, play half of the rival games, some of the bigger games on the 22nd, and then you could still always have Michigan and Ohio State at noon on that Saturday. The conference championship would fall on November the 30th, but the regular season would stay within that 14-week span because I think the 2 byes are really needed for all teams. So here we go. The defending national champions, the Michigan Wolverines. This would be their schedule for 2024 within my system. You would start off on that August 24th. You would play their first mid-major game. I just put in Eastern Michigan. So they would play the Eagles on the 24th. I'd go ahead and let them play. Next would be their non-conference Power 3 game. That would be August 31st, playing the Baylor Bears. Then we'd jump in to their conference games. I had split them up with one side being East, one side being West. Their first conference game would be the Illinois Fighting Illini, and then they would always play Notre Dame within that fourth game because that would be a big rival game for them. So I have them playing on September 14th. Then they'd get a bye, and then we're just going to run through these. Then they'd play, Purdue, Michigan State, Iowa, Indiana, Wisconsin, Penn State. I had pulled Duke from the ACC to be in the Big 25. Go look at that again. And then they get their bye week, their second bye week on November 16th. And then they'd play Ohio State on the 23rd. That would be the Thanksgiving weekend. And then you would have the conference championship. Now look, how this falls, it doesn't matter. If you want to start off with some conference games at the top and then throw Eastern Michigan before Ohio State and throw Baylor somewhere in the middle here, I just thought it would be easier for overall scheduling between all the teams to get all those other games ahead of all your conference games. And then once you get those 2 games done, it's all conference games from there on out. This is just an example of what a regular season would look like. And basically, all I did was add an extra bye week and push the start up. They're actually already started on Thanksgiving weekend rival games. I just think they should try to take over that Black Friday and start Black Friday rivals. Because Michigan State and Ohio State, I believe, played on the 25th this year. And then the conference championship was in December. It's just how this fell. It would fall on November the 30th. Moving on to my changes to the college football playoff. I only made a few minor changes to the scheduling, but now that we understand it, now I can get to the time frames and what I would do for the CFP changes. My first change would be to take away the home games for the highest ranked seed in that position. So if a 5 and 12 was playing each other, the 5 would get a home game to play the 12. I think these should all be bowl games. This is roughly when bowl games start, and you could use round 1, and we would use this rotation of bowls. So I put the Sun, Music City, Liberty. I created one for Indianapolis. Since they have a dome, you could call it the Racing Bowl. Doesn't matter. Then we have the Gator Bowl. I created a West Coast round 1 bowl so they could rotate it out. I called it the Golden Gate Bowl. They could play it in San Fran. They could play it in Washington, Oregon. It doesn't matter. I was just trying to get one on the West Coast. Then we have the Alamo, the Holiday, the Las Vegas, the Quick Lane, Mayo, and Independence. They could rotate all of these 4 bowl games every year, and it would be great for those cities, like, say, Alamo, to have San Antonio have one of these really good matchups for the playoff. So I just use 4 examples. So the first one I have is the Holiday Bowl. They could play that on December the 20th at 8 p.m. That would be on a Friday night. Then you would have December the 21st. You would have the other 3 round 1 games. You'd have the Gators, Sun, and Liberty all on that day. So that would be your first playoff weekend would be the 20th and 21st. Usually the bowl games start usually like around that same time. Before moving on to round 2, the quarterfinals, I want to justify why I think bowl games should be used in that round 1. If you look at this slide, look how well the playoffs did last year with the Rose and the Sugar. Their viewership was at 27 million and 18 million. Even some of the non-playoff bowls has some good viewership on it. Orange, Cotton, Peach, down to Fiesta, over 4 million. But now if you look at some of these other bowls, say the Liberty at 3, I mean, if it's a good game, you could get up into the 10s, maybe the 20s if it's a really good game. It just depends. All the way down to Music City at 2.63. So Nashville, you would give that city a boost in that bowl game, much more viewership with it being a playoff game. And then I'll revert back to some of my other justification is the kids that end up losing this game. I don't think it would be as fun as, say, if you go to University of Washington and get beat, then you're a top 12 team and you don't get to go to a bowl game. That kind of stinks. But they could use a lot of these bowls to give better viewerships and give the towns and fill those stadiums up for the playoff games. Moving into round 2, the quarterfinals. The quarterfinals would be played on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. So we all know the Rose Bowl probably was stopping the playoff in the beginning. So I would always have them as a quarterfinal game on January the 1st to keep that tradition. They'll pitch a fit if they don't get it. But the others could all rotate. And this is pretty much what the current 4-game playoff was doing, was rotating these bowl games out. You would have the Rose would never move, but then you would have Fiesta, Orange, Citrus, Peach, Sugar, and Cotton. All those could rotate in the quarterfinals and in the semis that I'll show next. Just for this example, Peach, Fiesta, they would play on New Year's Eve at 3 and 8, and then the Rose Bowl would keep their January the 1st, 3, 4 o'clock game time, and then that Cotton Bowl could be played that night for the quarterfinals. Now we'd move into the semis and the championship game. 2025's New Year's Day is on a Wednesday. So to give the teams a little bit of a chance to come back for the semis, I would just send it to the next Friday and Saturday. Because you're starting to get into the NFL playoffs, so college would have to kind of work this in. But I'd have the first semifinal game would be the Orange Bowl. That would be a Friday night at 8 p.m. on the 10th. And then the Sugar Bowl would be January the 11th at 8 p.m., which would probably bump one of the wild card games into Sunday night, which they could easily do. They could just do a 1-4-8 like they normally do during the regular season. Then we move over to the championship game. So the championship game has not been a bowl game recently, and I would agree it would be no bowl, neutral site, and then that would just be bid out to whoever. Now, it could still fall in, like this year I didn't have the Citrus Bowl falling in, so the Citrus Bowl could be that, or it could be like this past season where Houston had the national championship. Again, it doesn't matter. My biggest thing is I picked January the 18th at 6 p.m., which is a Saturday night. Or they could do Friday night at 8 p.m. But why in the world does the NCAA have championship games on Monday nights? They do it for football and basketball. Move it to Saturday or Friday night. If you're doing it Monday night at 8 o'clock, moving it to Friday night wouldn't be a big deal. And you're giving these teams roughly, a full week afterwards and you're not playing on a Monday night. I don't understand it. It makes no sense. I think they could get a lot more viewership on one of those nights instead of a Monday night. But and going back, March Madness plays all of their tournament games at neutral sites. That's another reason for the bowl games to be in that round one. To finish out my changes, I would have a 4+8 would be my model because of my super conferences. Three of the three conference champions would automatically get in, and then the highest ranked mid major, similar to what it is now. They would not get a bye unless they were in the top four, and if they were in the top 12, they would fall into whatever rank that would be. And if they're out of the top 12, just like it's going to happen, they would just get that 12th ranked seed, whatever the last one would be. Then there'd be no worries about independence. I had Notre Dame being pulled into the Big 25, and then UConn, UMass, Army were all pulled into one of the mid-major conferences that made regional sense. I've been saying this a lot. Go back and watch the Super Conference video. But let's look at how that college football playoff would have looked like this year. So let's take a look at the bracket. We'll start on the left-hand side with the 8th ranked Oregon versus the 9 seed Missouri. That would have fell into my Holiday Bowl on December the 20th. And then moving over on the right-hand side would have started all of those Saturday round one games. You would have had Ole Miss versus Georgia at the Gator Bowl. Then if you move back over to the left-hand side, you would have had Liberty versus Florida State at the Sun Bowl. And then going back across, you'd had a rematch with Penn State and Ohio State at the Liberty Bowl. Now going into the quarters, and I'm just going to pick the highest ranks as winning. Then you would have had Michigan playing Oregon at the Peach Bowl on New Year's Eve. Bouncing on the other side, you would have had Texas versus Georgia at the Fiesta Bowl on New Year's Eve. Going down, you would have had Florida State playing Alabama at the Rose Bowl. And then moving over, you would have Ohio State at Washington State at the Cotton Bowl. Now look, they could have switched that, and I just had the Rose Bowl on the left-hand side. They could move the Rose Bowl over here to play Ohio State and Washington, have that old Pac-12 and Big Ten matchup that they always like. And then the Cotton Bowl would have had Florida State and Alabama, which would have been a good switch because of that's how they would probably normally fall. Continuing with the highest seed winning, then we'd get into the semifinals. Michigan versus Alabama at the Orange Bowl. That would be a Friday night on January the 10th. Moving over, you'd have Texas versus Washington. Going to the Sugar Bowl, January the 11th at 8 p.m. That would have been a Saturday night. And then they would move to the championship game, wherever it's at, and you would have had Michigan and Washington again on that Friday night or Saturday night. But that would be how it would have looked like this year. And looking back on some of those matchups, Georgia, Texas, that would have been interesting. Ohio State, Washington would have been good. Oregon, Michigan would have been good. We all know Florida State lost their quarterback, so that had been kind of tough against Alabama. Wouldn't this have been a very fun tournament to watch? I said it all year long while I was doing my top 25. This would have been incredible, so I cannot wait until this year when we get into the new college football playoff. So there it is. I'll do a quick recap summary. I have beat the super conferences to death by now. I'm sure you're getting tired of hearing about it. But that was my first video. Again, I just made a Power 3, a Mid-Major 3. The Power 3 would be the Big 24, Big 25, and the SEC. And then the ACC Pac-2 would be dissolved. And then going into the NIL, I set a NIL cap controlled by the new coalition of conference athletes. So they would help them with the NIL. And then they would also help with the guiding rules for recruiting and the transfer portal. I built a recruiting system based off of 247's rankings. I'd bring back National Signing Day in the sense that it's only one day again. It's only in February, no Decembers. And then I would set some limits on the transfer portal with how many times a student can transfer and how many transfers a school can bring in. And then you just watch the CFP and scheduling. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you again for listening to Spider Red. I had fun with this series. I've been wanting to do it for a while. Be on the lookout for some of my next videos. I'm going to do a video on March Madness. I'm going to do my predictions, but I'm also going to talk about a site called kenpom.com. It's a great site. I love to look at it every year, and it's kind of awesome how well they pick a champion. And I'll show you how well those stats combine in to kind of show you which team could actually win a championship. And I will be doing a mock draft for the NFL for round 1, so be on the lookout for that as well. Tell somebody you love them. Later.